Alright, let's go down through these. This one right here is made with 5.5 blocks, which is 12.5 inches. This one, I can't remember what block it was. Where is my one? It's 4.5. This one right here is 11, and it is 3.5. And this one right here is 6.5, 6.25, and we had to put a 2.5 inch right here in the middle. And then we have the itty bitty one, which I think is so cute, and it's 5.25. So, I think what I'm going to go with is these right here, 5.5, and work on them. I think this one's it. No, this is a 4. I should have put them on there, but of course, we can't go back. No, not that one. But we have different ones, and we can choose from which one we want. I think this one right here is it. Yeah, this one right here would be it. No, it ain't either. This is the first one. Alright, well, I'm going to find out which one it is. I think it's this one over here. Alrighty, let's get started on doing some. What'd I do with it? Oh no. I'm making a mess. Alright, these are going to go up here in this thing. I think this one right here is the one that I'm going to stick with, because it's a bigger block, and I like bigger blocks because they're easier to make. Alright, so let's see what we can do about throwing it up here. Oh no, that'd be right in my face. Can't do that. Alright. And I need to put these up. I need to put all these right here back up, because I'm not gonna want them. Alright, here we go.
Are by individuals like Celsus, who is a Greco-Roman philosopher in the 2nd century, where he accused Christianity of being foolish, dishonorable, and stupid, and he called it the religion of slaves, women, and children. Why? Not because God used the masculine pronoun for himself and people were abusing that, because the concept that Christians believed in of everybody, no matter what your gender, your race, your social standing, you know, Paul says in Christ there is no slave nor free, there is no Jew nor Gentile, there is no Scythian or barbarian, there's no male nor female. You know, these things united people. And we can see there's a historian named Rodney Stark, and in his book, The Rise of Christianity, he actually says that you can track empirically the agency of women across the ancient world by the movement of Christianity. So that, in other words, whenever an area became populated by Christians, we see a direct correlation with the privileges and treatments of women that expand in time when the surrounding culture largely didn't view women as being fully human. So I think we're always going to have abuses, but if there's one worldview that exists that gives agency to people and says that everybody has worth by nature of being just human, it's the Christian worldview. And that's where I think it's very different. So we can argue about why we think God should or shouldn't have revealed himself in his pronouns, but I think that's actually irrespective of the historical reality that we see within the impact of Christianity, particularly on the West, but around the world, and how it gives agency to the marginalized.
Wes, can I ask you one? So I'm always interested in this, like you were raised Christian. I always think about this, like my wife who's Muslim, and our beliefs at the core are so similar, but there's some differences. And I wonder, like, if I was born in Sierra Leone, West Africa, where she was, I know in the Bible says Christ revealed, but C.S. Lewis is someone that I really respect, because I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a think outside the box, always, and we should be. No one should just be like sheep and follow what any of us are saying. Like, do your research on your own with everything, of course. But what led you, sorry, going back to C.S. Lewis real quick, he was a famous scholar who was once an atheist, set out on a journey to basically disprove the Bible. As he went to do that, he himself found out that it to be like one of the most historically accurate written books, which really shocked him. He then became a Christian after that. He's done the Narnia movies, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or their books. They weren't movies when he passed away. But he has an amazing... I love people like him because he doesn't just act like... He always was questioning everything. He's like, why is there this going? Why are these little kids dying, God, when they're... But something that he continued to come up with, which reminded me so much of Jesus and the love conquers all things too, is when so many people overly get caught up on religion over the relationship. And he's like, I've actually met some atheists that are closer to God without even knowing it. And I've met some Christians that are further away from God without even knowing it. And I believe that too so much. And I'm just really curious, like, as you went on your journey as being like a historian, studying biblical text, and then being raised, of the church, did you take it, I don't want to put, because did you take it upon, like, whatever I continue to discover, I'm going to have to accept, like, say something you did find when you were in Egypt revealed differently than what you were taught? Like, did you kind of tell yourself, I'm going on a quest, like searching for truth without like a set conclusion to prove Christianity, knowing that it could go either way? Am I making sense?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a bit of an unusual household in that my mom grew up in India, and my parents, when I was younger, I was born in Pakistan, and I spent a portion of my childhood in Jordan. I grew up in majority Muslim countries and surrounded by majority Muslim environments. And we had, a copy of the Quran in the room. In fact, we had the Bhagavad Gita and the Book of Mormon, and for a little while, other documents in our house. These were things that my parents, although they never verbally said, Christianity is true, therefore these are not forbidden. These are not verboten. The truth, capital T truth, of the reality of the world we behold can stand up against scrutiny and investigation. And I did do a great deal of that as a kid. My dad is a historian as well. He has a doctorate, and I grew up on him, reading the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. But at the exact same time, the reason why I actually went to university with full intention of going into the police force, but it was interactions with Muslims and Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and atheists and accusations against the credibility of the Bible, which actually piqued my interest. Because they would say things that I thought, if that's true, of course that undermines what I believe. I believe that Jesus is God incarnate. If I can't trust the Gospels as reliable first century eyewitness testimony, then I might as well throw all of this away, because I'm not going to believe a lie, even if it's a convenient lie. And so it was actually the exploration of eventually going into graduate college and then now in working on my PhD, the largest secular university in Canada, that got me thinking, okay, how do we investigate these things? What are the methodologies by which we go about to explore the origins and credibility of something like the Bible? And that investigation, with all due respect to Billy and the content that you put out, has actually confirmed what I believe. You know, I'm dealing with the actual manuscripts. I travel to academic institutions, to other countries, and I look at these things and I read them. And it's a privilege to be able to learn languages like Greek and Coptic and Hebrew and Aramaic and dig into these things. And I think ultimately, I really appreciate what you said there, Mark, with your articulation of your personal relationship. And I think that's so important. But I think it's also important to remember that that relationship is based on something that's real and verifiable. And we can look into the evidence. You know, I have friends who are linguists, philologists, and historians. And when we look into these things and we talk with one another and we're discussing, we're constantly trying to falsify our theories, because that's what good history does. We're looking for the falsification. You don't go in, ideally, if you want to be a good historian, with trying to prove your original thesis. You go in and say, okay, what are the avenues that actually could disprove this? And then how do we engage with those in an appropriate and articulate manner? So what I believe is true, but I believe it based on the evidence of the actual documentation. You know, I've read a lot of the literature that you're talking about, Billy, the Enuma Elish, the Atrahasis, the Bhagavad Gita, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I've read some of them in their original languages because I've tried to be a good historian and go back into the primary sources. Or if I can't, engage with people like my friends who are Assyriologists, who are philologists, and try to not just go off of a translation, but the original. And I think I found largely the opposite of the conclusions that you have made, Billy. And I know that you are very passionate about what you talk about, and I respect that. I just think that the confidence might not actually be backed up by the reality of the evidence. So when we're looking at something like the Sinai Bible, when we're looking at something like the Gospel of Barnabas, when we're looking at something like the Gospel of Jesus' wife, these are things that actually have provenance that we can verify. And ultimately, I think the answers to the questions of the legitimacy or the illegitimacy of those things point to not just a different conclusion, but actually the opposite conclusion, and that Christianity is true.
Well, now I'm glad you said that. So those three topics are a very small piece of my concept and idea of what really happened in the ancient past. So that's a very small fraction, and that's less than 0.1%. You talk about eyewitness accounts convinced you that Christianity is real. There's been eyewitness accounts of every culture that I've visited around this entire planet, and their eyewitness accounts of what they experienced is 100,000% opposite of what's in the Bible. People have
based on what do you mean? Can you give me an example?
You know, the Dogon tribe, for example, in Mali, Africa, they experienced a culture that they claim came to this planet from Sirius B. They have the evidence that they knew these beings were from Sirius B because they have the instruments that show the orbit of a trinary star system that we couldn't discover until the 1970s with our modern technology, okay? They understood not only the orbital pattern of Sirius A, B, and C, but even that B was a failed star, which you can't see it from Earth with the naked eye. They knew that it was a white dwarf. They even knew that they said that if you took a tablespoon of it, the entire tribe or 1,000 men couldn't lift the tablespoon. They understood mass and gravity as well. They were told the shape, the sizes, and the colors of all the planets in our solar system, which they recorded. And there's only one wisdom keeper, and that person can never be touched by a person. If they get touched by another person, they'd actually be killed. And then they eventually have a mentee that they break down that verbally handed down knowledge to, and that next person then takes over and becomes the wisdom keeper. And they've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. And science, modern science, has found, we're told the shape, the sizes, and the colors of all the planets in our solar system, which they recorded. and there's only one wisdom keeper, and that person can never be touched by a person. If they get touched by another person, they'd actually be killed. And then they eventually have a mentee that they break down that verbally handed down knowledge to, and that next person then takes over and becomes the wisdom keeper. And they've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. And science, modern science, has found all their information to be 1,000% accurate. Then you have the Hopi tribe of the Americas, indigenous tribes, Hopi tribe, Lakota tribe, also having engagements with these quote-unquote star brothers, even having an account of them being taken underground, which you don't see just only in America. I just came back from Turkey. You have the people from Turkey and Mesopotamia also being taken underground into a place called Derinkuyu by these beings, by these people, a structure that's built 12 stories deep underground, that's made out of volcanic tuff, a very soft stone, and if you don't know what you're doing, it'll actually collapse. There's no evidence of any collapse, and it was thousands of years old. It was reused many times, so the mainstream story about what it was used for, to hide from Romans, is actually false. This place is ancient, and in order to build it, you actually have to have foreknowledge of how to construct this type of an underground civilization that can hold 20 to 30,000 people, places for livestock, places for worship, with no sign of collapse. And you have to have hundreds of ventilation shafts, and I've been down there. Those ventilation shafts cut through solid rock all the way down to the core. And there's even more. It links to other underground cities that are miles and miles away. As you get to the very base of this area, you can cut through and go to another location. But again, these people were taken under. Also, then you have the ancient Egyptians. Similar story. Major catastrophe comes. These people come and take them underground. Then you have the information in the Egyptian book of Going Forth by Day. More accounts by people, our ancestors, that have accounts that do not match up with the biblical text. And so all of a sudden we're saying that all these cultures, the Aboriginal people, I can go into them as well. I've gone to walkabouts in Outback. In the Outback,
Yeah.
the Aboriginal elders, same thing. They were seated here by Pleiadians. This is their verbal handed down history for thousands of years. And I can go around the world and I can come up with all this information from all these eyewitness accounts from people that should be respected, dignified, and shouldn't be scoffed. And that we're now saying that all this information that they put forward, all their verbal handed down history, all their written history, that's got to go to the side, because this one text is 1,000% accurate.
Sure, but so my question is, most of that is oral history, correct?
Oh, it's all oral history, even the Bible.
Okay, so when we're engaging with oral history, what methodologies are you using to confirm that the orality is accurate?
Oh, man. Well, first and foremost, some of these texts cultures have written down information in caves. You've got cave paintings. The Dogon tribe actually have not only written down.
Sure. No, I don't disagree with that. The question is one of historic. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. The question is one of methodological analysis. So you have to have a method by which you can find either that something is falsifiable or that there are avenues by which you can show internal and external accuracy of credibility. So this is what we do with documents. This is what we do with the ancient Gospels. This is what I do. I've worked on Xenophon and Plutarch. And we look at the internal evidences and the external multivalent corroboration to try to figure out, okay, yes, we have all these stories. Great. I don't deny that. But as a historian, as someone who's trying to figure out what is accurate, how do you know if I use the term verisimilitude, do you know what that term means?
No, but I can tell you this. Tell me how the Dogon tribe saw Sirius B, knew the orbit of Sirius B, a trinary star system, accurately, and can show you the orbit with a special tool that they made that was given to them by these people. How do they know the shapes, the sizes, the colors, and the orbital pattern of all these planets in our solar system and other star alignments that they would use to have something called the Ziggy and planet and their own harvesting and planting and so forth and so on? That's not enough evidence that there's something.
Well, I'm not aware of that particular case. And even, I would grant that, the ancient people are far more technological advanced than we give themselves credit for. Just because they're ancient doesn't mean they're stupid. I am well aware, as someone who has done both investigation of the past and done archaeological analysis, that is a reality. My question is simply, okay, you have these stories, or you have these accounts, you're referring to them as eyewitness testimony. How are you going about verifying that as that?
Well, if the people had eyewitness testimony about Jesus, they then just wrote down their eyewitness testimony on a piece of paper or parchment paper or papyrus. So these people...
Right. So that's where internal methodological analysis...
Some of it's actually written down. So, I mean, it's the same exact thing. There's really no difference.
Well, no. So you do internal investigations to figure out when something was dated. So something like... So when I used that term verisimilitude before, that's something these historians are looking for. It's a term that simply means the appearance or likelihood of truthfulness. So when you do historical analysis, it's an inference to the best explanation. So you have proof and you have data, and you're extrapolating that data on levels of probability. So some things can be confirmed as high probabilistically true, and other things are lower in their probability that they happened. But there are different methodologies, different ways that you explore historically how that happens. So for the Gospels, we look at...
With the Dogon tribe, scientists went there to visit the tribe, and they still have no answers because they used their modern science. They took the best scholars to visit these people, and they're still scratching their heads. Something happened there.
Sure. And I'm not even denying that necessarily, but the question is, okay, we need different levels of evidence and exploration, not just scientifically, but historically, to derive something as eyewitness testimony. Now, we have mountains of that, and I'm more than willing to go into some of that with the Gospels as early eyewitness testimony that can be verified externally and internally. But nonetheless, the only reason I ask, Billy, is because I've listened to a fair amount of your content, and I'm unaware of the methods that you use to try to discern between what is an accurate source historiographically and an inaccurate source historiographically.
Well,
does that make sense?
I use getting in an airplane and traveling to these places, doing my own research, talking with the indigenous cultures, and researching as much of the text that is available that I can possibly find.
Okay, so I don't dispute that, and I do believe you have done that. But I mean, even from what we've talked about, so you've researched the text, but when we talked about the crucifixion, everything you cited was either, and I mean with all due respect, false in terms of the Sinai Bible, because Codex Sinaiticus is just a 4th century Greek manuscript of the Gospels that we have today, or they were verified forgeries in terms of the Gospel of Jesus' wife and the Gospel of Barnabas.
You may be right on that particular part of the topic, but like I said, that's less than 0.1% of the information that I hold.
Sure, but that was the original question. So so that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, okay, well, so I'm going off of what we've already talked about. So you said you explore the text. I don't deny that. But the evidence, by going off of what you have put forward in terms of the actual documentary evidence, is not just less than convincing in my respect, and I mean this with respect, because I think you have done a lot of research. You've traveled to these places. I have too. Like, this is what I do as my career. But I'm not really getting indication, because in history we go to the primary sources in their primary languages. And when Mark asked, okay, why do you deny the crucifixion? The sources you used were not primary.
Okay, we're still talking and they over and over again. There's so much more we can talk about here. We're wasting a lot of time. There's so much more. That's this amount.
Do you guys
so much more stuff to talk about?
Do you think that all these different cultures and stuff describing these other beings, could those have been? I'm not an expert theology or whatever, but like where it talks about war, I always want to personally ask you this too, where in the Bible it talks about like wars between the demons and the angels. There's a lot of crazy stuff in the Bible too that you can prove it's been written, but it also takes some faith, because you can't physically see where there was wars between demons and angels and stuff fighting in the heavens. So there's tons going on, obviously. Could any of those have been, like, from what you've discovered or how people have written it, do you think those could have been demons or angels?
I don't believe in demons or angels at all.
You don't believe in them at all?
Nah, I don't believe in demons and angels. When you read Azazel coming down in the book of Enoch, coming down, and the first thing he does is teach people how to make knives and swords so they can cut a man's head off. You read, you see these quote unquote.
Where is that in the book of Enoch?
In the book of Enoch, Azazel. He comes down and he teaches.
Where is that in the book of Enoch? Is it the only reason I ask is because there are two Enochs, first Enoch and second Enoch, and only first Enoch is an actual historical amalgamation.
Okay. And then you analyze the fact that these angels are having sex, they're getting drunk. These are just people.
Whoa. Where are angels getting drunk?
Angels party, they go, they hang out with people, they go to war with people, they put on their outfits and they go to war with people.
Where are they getting drunk though?
They get married, okay? Whatever that means. But they're having.
They don't get married.
Okay. Not
married. In fact, Scripture says that angels can't get married.
Merry Christmas.
Not married. Mary. Merry. But the point that I'm making here is when you start to really analyze what these angels are doing, and you start to analyze how many people are dying in the biblical text, you start to say, well, how many people did Satan actually kill? And when you start doing the tally on the numbers, God's doing most of the killing in the Bible. It's not the devil that's doing all the killing. And then God says in Isaiah, I created the good and I created the evil. Do what I say at the Lord. So he's saying that he's doing the good and the evil. That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
My personal opinion on this whole thing, I just let me get this out because we keep going over the same rhetoric over and over again. My personal opinion is that the biblical text is a good book. Like I've said, I've got videos. My number one video on Twitter has me saying this. It's good text because if you actually apply some of the information that's in the Bible, you can get a good result, like you have done, Mark.
Right. I struggle with no, I want you to finish your thought. Go ahead.
Yeah. So because you can get a good result, but there's a lot of misinformation in the Bible. There's a lot of false information that's copied from ancient text. And if you go by that text, all of a sudden you end up with 400 years of slavery. You end up with abuse. You end up with divide and conquer tactics that separate people. You end up with people thinking that they're the chosen ones and they're the chosen people. And we've been promised this promised land so we can eradicate another race of people because this is our land, because God promised it to us. You have people that want to go on the papal inquisitions and torture and kill and murder over 80 million people. You have the American Holocaust, 111 million indigenous natives slayed. You have all this going on because of this text, which is set up so contradictory throughout its path across time. You get into the New Testament, slavery is still being condoned in the New Testament.
Was it?
Honor thy slaves, master, as you would honor God or Jesus, it says, I believe. So in Ephesians.
Well, it doesn't say that. But
the God of the Old Testament, too, like I'll let you go real quick, but I'm just, and I know you have to go soon too, but I'm speaking as I challenge my own subject. It was always, I'm telling you guys, this is where Jesus came in and changed everything for me. But like the Old Testament too, it is hard for me to read even Noah thinking God's like mad at everyone. Let's flood the whole world and murder all these people that I created.
That's pretty bad stuff.
But it seems so contradictory to, and I'm speaking, Wes, as a Christian, and I don't have the, whatever they call papyrus. There isn't. This is where people, but I continue to follow in my heart, but it's so, Jesus did not seem like that at all. But they say God's the same as then as he was now. Like time, he created time. So he didn't come down, as Jesus and change and evolve and then come back with new information and be like, you know what, I don't think I'm going to flood and do. So these are more, I guess, like bigger moral questions that there's not necessarily, but that's where things like the Old Testament challenge me at times. And I know there's a lot of things where they correlate, and I've seen some cool things that come together too, but it's just like, man, to think like I'm going to flood and murder all these people that I created and then leave a few alive doesn't seem like what Jesus did at all.
Sorry to interrupt you, there's a couple more points I want to make because he got a lot of talking in. It did say, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear as sincerity of heart as you would obey Christ. That's slaves. Obey your earthly masters with respect and fear with sincerity in your heart, just as you would obey Christ. So It does say that Ephesians 6:5, but there's so many
that
aspects.
stuff is what.
And what is the context of what Ephesians is saying? So I think this is very important because we don't take text in isolation. So within Scripture, and this is why all the abolition movements throughout history have only been Judeo-Christian movements. There's never been an abolition movement that wasn't Christian. And actually, there's the recent work by historian Tom Holland, not the Spider-Man actor, different Tom Holland, but his recent Dominion highlights this fact very well. This is not a Christian, but in it, he shows that going right back into the antiquity with the Cappadocian Fathers, it was the first abolition movement, and then into the British and the American abolition movements. These were fundamentally Christian movements ran by Christians because of the idea that when Paul, who wrote that letter to Ephesians, says, in Christ there is no slave nor free, he's breaking down those barriers. So in Ephesians, when he says, slaves obey your masters, he's operating on the socioeconomic context of what he's going on. And he's saying, hey, we have slaves and we have free people, okay? If you're a believing slave, if you're a slave who believes in Jesus as the Messiah, don't be equitable in how you are living your life. Reflect Christ accurately. And that's a movement that he is fundamentally working towards that eventually starts to completely take out the legs from the slave movement in general.
By the way, I love that this is respectful. I don't feel this is all just three grown-ups talking in a healthy way.
I appreciate this.
And I think this is going to give us but this is where you and I sitting down in a room, I would be like, great that you came to that, but like what were the methodologies did you use to conclude that him saying the slave be the master to the slave, you're able to interpret it meaning that he's meaning that? Because I was also raised in the church, and I would question when they're like, oh, in the old days when they said women don't wear jewelry, that's a sin. You would know the exact verse.
Yes.
And then they're like, oh, but that was just written because at that time that was what they did. But then the next week they're telling me, but if you believe in the Bible, you either believe in all of it or none of it. I'm like, well, how come you're just... And they're like, but it's okay for women to do that. Now, those are the things where it's like, we've got to be honest here. Like, if you're respectfully challenging Billy, Billy's going to go and do research and be like, okay, now I want to see how to have, because we're all critical thinkers. Those things seem to just get so blindly pushed over when they're like, but that doesn't apply now. And it's like, I think there's more common ground than people think, and so many words to recall, but also like it's weird to me to think that he would be like, women aren't allowed to wear jewelry and this crap, and then Jesus came and he's like, none of that matters. And then for them to be like, oh, that only made sense then, but now it doesn't apply. But believe everything.
Right. So this is what's referred to.
You know what? Like,
So this is
this is why, like, I'm always like.
So there's a discipline called hermeneutics, and that's the methodology of interpretation. So there are multiple levels that you interpret something. So whether we're dealing with, say, the book of Ephesians, or we're dealing with Tacitus's Annals, we look at something and we contextually read it within the framework of how it's being written. So there's a historical approach where we look at the context. Okay, Paul is writing to a church in Ephesus. What's going on in Ephesus, and how is what he's saying in that city in what is modern-day Turkey, how does that pertain to that particular time and framework? Where is Paul coming from? Where is
now, though, is my question. Because
here's how I answer that question.
And I love you to death, Wes, but you're starting to give. Sorry to interrupt you. I believe in God. Like, I believe in and Billy believes in God too. I get why things are challenged and things need to be challenged, but it's saying that was to women then, but being raised in the church
so it's
and
yes
stuff,
and no.
They say, but then they'll pick something and they're like, but that doesn't apply to them now, because in that context, he was talking to that certain this certain town where they were having problems with I'm like, well, that's not written anywhere. And they're like, well, if you go to blah blah blah, and then they say, well, God is all knowing, so he perfectly chose what was in and out of the Bible. I believe whoever created the universe, which is God, in my own opinion, is way smarter than any of us. Why would he leave something like that crap in there, that women shouldn't wear jewelry and all that, and then have in the New Testament that crap doesn't really matter? Like that's where it's like I have to believe that it's not I do think there is parts where things got written in, and I don't think they're the major things personally, like whether or not Jesus was crucified, which I think is a major thing, because if he wasn't, that I've studied that a lot, that would challenge that would challenge the core of my whole belief system over whether or not it said if women can wear jewelry or something. But I do think that, and I don't know if there's an exact answer to this, but I do think, that's perplexing to me. The God of all wisdom would choose to leave some of that in there. It's like, why?
Yeah. So here's the thing. So the Bible was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. There is an original audience, whether that's the ancient Israelite in the ancient Near Eastern culture, or whether it's the Greco-Roman believer in Jesus within the city of Ephesus. So as historians, and I mean, most of the books on this end of my shelf are what are referred to as commentaries.
Sorry, I got to
theologians and historians.
Would God be smart enough to know, I'm not just going to write to this demographic of this civilization now, knowing I'm a God who created the whole world, and people are still going to be studying this thousands of years later?
Yeah.
That's
what I was going to say, but I didn't want to cut it off.
Yes.
So I'm sorry.
No. So
by the way,
here's how I would
I'm the
answer that,
worst
Mark.
interrupter ever, and it's more of my ADD type thing of like, I get a thought and I got to get it out, or else I freaking forget it. So I'm sorry about interrupting. Thanks for throwing me under the bus for that.
Yeah. So, how I would answer that is I would say this. So you do have examples of where Paul is writing, and he's writing to a particular group. And so we look at, okay, what does it mean for a woman to wear and adorn themselves with gold in a first century Greco-Roman context, right? It has to do with the fact that prostitutes would wear those things. So we need to ask the question, what is the intention of the text? Yes,
I gotta ask
we can
you again,
take the meaning.
But how do you interpret that's what I've been, the reason I'm interrupting you is I've heard this. I've been there, done that.
Yes.
I respect the crap out of you for how deep you go into studying the ancient texts and stuff, which is so important for the real root of it all. But they've told me that same thing, and I'm like, but why doesn't it just say that he was speaking to the women and stuff that were prostitutes of that time? Like, where does that correlate?
He's not speaking to prostitutes. He's talking about purity, and he's talking in the context of when he says, don't adorn yourself with jewelry. The original audience, and we can explore this by the historical analysis.
How dumb that sounds? Saying the original audience, then later on saying, but now it's okay for this audience because these women and stuff.
No, because it's the point that he's making.
I get why people like, if we're gonna, we got to be open-minded. If we're punching holes in other stuff, to punch holes in our own, and even if it's agreeing, like don't you think that's a little? I get what you're saying. Like if prostitutes at that right now, if prostitutes all wear a red band around their neck, and that signals what all prostitutes are. And it's like, don't wear that.
Prostitutes have tattoos, and a lot of women who aren't prostitutes have tattoos.
Right. I don't think it's this black and white that only the prostitute, and also you're only talking about in one little town. So my bigger question would be to God.
Well, in Greco-Roman antiquity,
why did you put that in the Bible?
So
that just confuses everyone, though, because all these other civilizations are going to be reading that.
We have something we keep saying here. God didn't put that in the Bible. Men put this stuff in the Bible.
And I think that was some of the old. I'm telling you, Billy. It's for me. I think he'll get back. If it wasn't for Sorry, we got you back on, Wes.
Yeah.
I
I understand what you're saying, Mark, but what I'm saying is I think we're missing a big point here. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the Bible is written by people, men who are extremely flawed. And the evidence of that is what they did, what they took the information that's in that biblical text and what they did with it globally to other human beings, and how they even wrote about it in the Bible, how they enslaved and tortured people in the biblical text. So in that case, even in the book of Deuteronomy, which is one of the most brutal books out there, where everything is given okay to rape women, kill children. If one person talks against your Lord, go to that town and kill the whole town, burn the town down.
So brutal.
It's just too much. Like I said,
it turns people into salt.
The killing in the Bible is not being done by Satan. That's why I'm saying I don't care. I don't believe in demons and all this other kind of stuff. Moses goes to the top. He talks to God. He gets his tablet. The first commandments are, "Thou shalt not kill." He comes down. As soon as he sees the people making a golden calf, he kills most of them. It's just like, come on.
And I've learned with some of these stories how it correlated with kill your first son, related to then what happened with Jesus. But I'm still like, in my head, they're like, that's so beautiful. He was willing to sacrifice his son as God would. And I'm like,
I don't believe
that's
beautiful.
So mean that God,
I don't believe it's beautiful.
like, Jesus changed my whole story. No, when I'm in heaven, and I don't believe God is irrational, because he would be smarter than every one of us to be able to literally create everything. I would be like, God, I don't like. Why would you tell that dude to kill his son?
I don't see any benefit in killing your own kid.
And then right at the last second, he's like, "No, it's cool. I was just testing your faith in me." It's like that seems psychologically. To me, when God's like, kill your own son, but then at the last minute,
it's sadistic.
Don't do it. Oh man, you proved your faith to me. I would be like, God, isn't there like I don't feel like you need to do that to a person. I don't think that's such a beautiful story. And I'm talking as a Christian. There's a lot of things with the Old Testament I struggle with, but it doesn't change my overarching beliefs. And I think there is things that are written in, maybe misinterpreted, that aren't as important as the bigger things, like the crucifixion and stuff of Jesus. Like, I'm hoping to God that your methodology of proving that is right compared to Billy's in that specific scenario. But in some of these other things, like, I almost rather them be disproved, that God killed his that God and I've heard a lot of these different answers and stuff, and I know God gave us free will, and I understand all that too, but it's just like the God of the Old Testament and Jesus, it's hard to believe that they're the same person.
Yeah, I cut out quite a bit there, and so I think I missed a large portion, so I apologize for that.
And I
might get to say a lot of stuff that I want to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, so let me just say this. So the most quoted verse of the Bible in the Bible is a version of Exodus 34:6, which fundamentally describes who God is, that he's compassionate and loving, full of grace and mercy, and abounding in steadfast love. And so, in fact, if you read the book of Jonah, the beef that Jonah has with God, the reason why he doesn't want to go to Nineveh, is because he believes that God is so loving that if he tells the Ninevites to repent and they repent, God is going to forgive them. So fundamentally, we have the picture of God consistently throughout the Bible, both in the Old and New Testaments, as being a God who is rich in love and mercy and abounding in steadfast kindness. And so we want a God who is just. And just to speak very briefly to the slavery issue, I mean, Leviticus 25 condemns by death the man stealing. So stealing someone and selling them into slavery. And the fact that the Ten Commandments are prefaced with, you are a nation who was slaves. You know, I'm the God of Israel who brought you out of Egypt. So there's a fundamental difference, and there's lots of literature on this. I would encourage people to read my friend Paul Copan's book, Is God a Moral Monster? He's written some excellent stuff. He's also written on Did God Command Genocide in the Old Testament? He's a leading expert in the field of a comparative analysis of ancient Near Eastern war literature. And so there are very coherent explanations for these things, and that slavery within ancient Israel was very, very different from what slavery around the ancient Near East was like. And on top of